Hey everyone, for today's video I want to talk to you about inspiration. Things that can help you as a dungeon master to come to the table and prepare some things, especially when things kind of go off the rails a little bit. So, it's often well known that as a dungeon master, you're a storyteller, you're a facilitator of wonderful action and epic adventure. So you are going to want to ensure that you have invested yourself into building a library, a visual library, some things you can pull from in your head that you can bring with you to the table. What I mean by this, and it's often something that's already sort of a given, it's kind of already covered, is if you're going to be a dungeon master, ensure that you've invested the time and energy into watching and knowing about Lord of the Rings, and maybe you're into Game of Thrones and you watch that TV series and you've already read the George R.R. Martin books and you know R.A. Salvatore. Even though you don't run in the world of Forgotten Realms, or perhaps you're sort of new to the hobby and you've only been playing since 4th, maybe 5th edition, you still know what Dark Sun is. You know what Greyhawk is and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and things of that nature. So the reason why you want that stuff and why those things are so important is they just start to fuel creativity in your head. So when you need to come up with things on the fly, you have some things that you can pull from. If your PCs are heading into an area that is sort of run down, sort of a wasteland, a desert, if you will. Maybe you've played, I think it was Act 2 in Diablo 3, the most recent Diablo game from Blizzard. Maybe you've watched Mad Max. The point is you have these visual cues, this library of things that you've remembered in your head that you can pull from, and you can kind of create awesome content from that. Now, aside from that, what things around you can you use for inspiration? I'd like to show you a couple of pictures of my office, basically, and more importantly, one of the shelves or a couple of shelves in my office where I have numerous art books. Now, aside from just being a dungeon master, I am a massive fan of concept art. I'm an artist, I'm a designer, I have been for almost 3 decades. So I just truly love seeing the behind the scenes of the making of Lord of the Rings. So not just watching the movie itself and getting Peter Jackson's vision, but also understanding how they made the Uruk-hai the way they made them and why they chose that type of armor. And this goes for all movies that have any sort of visual spectacle, whether it's Godzilla, King Kong, anything that has the big involvement from the big design studios, Weta Digital and ILM and DreamWorks and things of that nature, Pandora and Avatar, right? Comic book movies, of course, Marvel, DCU, anything that has just really strong visuals, really strong environmental and character design. I like to invest myself in that. But by sort of browsing through these books, I start to build and I use these things to fuel my creativity and I build this visual library. So when I come to the table with a wizard or a dragon, I've got Dragon Heart, the one that was voiced by Sean Connery. I've got Dragon Slayer. I have Smaug. I have the dragons that were in Neverwinter Nights. I have Alduin from Skyrim, and I've got Deathwing from World of Warcraft, and I have that perspective of all these different creatures all for one dragon. So I can pull from this visual library when I explain that he's sort of, and he's more reptilian, and you can see the black dragon, but yet there's acid that's bubbling and sort of melting at his flesh. These are things that I've seen where I remember in EverQuest there was a dragon that had sort of this pestilence-infused poisoned wings that sort of made him almost part Dracolich, where it was eating away at his wings and his flesh. These are things that build a visual library, and they give you more to explain and offer to your players than just whatever the description in the monster manual is. Now, what I'd also like to do is I want to take you over to the computer. I'm kind of at the computer, but I want to take you over to Photoshop and show you a couple of pieces of artwork that I've been given permission to use for non-commercial use. So I'm using them here to just explain to you a way that you can use concept art, sort of the real getting down to the detail of it, of pretending I just showed you all my concept art books and the art of books, but now I want to show you what it might be like if I took an actual picture. And even if you don't have these books, we have the beauty of the internet. You can look on Pinterest. You can look on websites such as DeviantArt and ArtStation and just simply Google concept art, click on the image tab and look for images that are within a certain size, and you will find anything you ever need. When you type the word skeleton or lich or dragon into Google, you'll have an endless amount of inspiration. And I want to just show you sort of a little bit of my process that I might go through when I'm looking at some concept art to start fueling and getting the wheels turning so I can bring what is otherwise a really cool encounter and really raise it up to another level. Okay, so let me just show you. Let's get over to the computer. I'm going to kind of make some adjustments here because I want to get the Wacom out in front of me as well so that I can sort of noodle and detail on the artwork itself and show you what I'm talking about. So let me just move some things. I'll be back. I'm going to jump ahead. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Photoshop. As I said, I've got a couple of pieces of artwork here that I've been given permission to use from the artists themselves. I reached out to them through ArtStation, and I just told them that I was going to be using it for various demo purposes or Instagram, YouTube, to sort of just talk about some fantasy Dungeons and Dragons related content. Obviously, I'm not claiming that this is my stuff. This artist here, check him out on ArtStation. His name is Thomas Duchek. Okay? So, let me do another layer just so I can kind of talk about some points here. As I said, I'd like to just show you some simple things as to some things I might consider when I see a wonderful piece of artwork as this, and how I allow it to create a foundation of creativity that I can bring with me to the table. So let's say you're running your PCs in an adventure, and besides that visual library that I'm assuming you've already built, when you're dealing with forest, you want to have read some books that deal with characters that have been through forest so that you can get a good perspective. You want to have seen the way Aragorn and the Fellowship approached Fangorn and the way the treants were moving through and just the sounds, the audio of that. So when you as a dungeon master describe this epic forest landscape, you have a lot to pull from. And the reason why things like this are also good, where you build this visual library, is because oftentimes as a dungeon master, if you are running content and your PCs kind of go off the rails, or you've got a wealth of content, a folder's worth of content, your 10, 15 hour, 3-week prep time is all notes on what happens in the West. And you don't want to railroad your players. You give them the freedom, but your PCs all decide to go East. What do? How do you wrangle that in? And now, if you're running pre-published stuff and modules, this video may not be as much help for you. The visual library and just being able to describe things better based on your experiences does matter. But in regards to kind of coming up with things on the fly, if you're running pre-published stuff, it's going to kind of tell you where to go, right? It has that very much, if they go right, read this. If they go left, read this. But especially when you're working from scratch, when you have nothing, you can simply pull up some pictures, and if there's a druid that they are about to meet, the beauty of looking at someone else's concept art, especially when it's not art that was drawn specifically for your adventure, for your world. This individual, I just looked from a Google search, I found this art, and I asked him if I can use it for a demo for what I'm doing here on this video. He didn't draw this knowing what I'm thinking about when I think of druid. But by looking at this image, what are we looking at here? First off, if we just look at the sheer size of this individual, he's a pretty big dude. So I don't know why he made him of this size. I don't know what he was commissioned for, if this is just a personal piece. But it starts getting the wheels turning, because your stereotypical druid, you figure, maybe World of Warcraft, you're going to have antlers, and he's very elven looking, and he's ancient, and he's old, and he clearly comes from groves, right? We have those stereotypes, we have those tropes, those tried and true defaults. But by looking at concept art and browsing through and finding something, you start to create more story, more adventure than what you would have already thought of. And you create that just simply by what you're seeing visually. And when you bring that to the table, it makes that encounter, it makes that situation significantly more epic. So in this particular regard, as I said, he's larger. He's a pretty good sized dude. So maybe what it gets me thinking is maybe he has a background of being a barbarian. Maybe something happened in his past that through his barbarian, his rage, his very violent lifestyle, he lost some key friends. And that kind of pacified him a little bit and forced him to move towards the life of a druid. So clearly now we have an NPC that was just going to be a druid, but based on physical stature, I've now created a little more backstory to him. I talked about how maybe in his past as a barbarian, he lost some key friends. Maybe the only way he was able to save a friend was to sort of nature-wise or, divine magic polymorph one of his friends into this bird. And this bird now travels with him. It's always going to be stuck in bird form. It's sort of a permanent polymorph, but the essence, the soul of his friend is still there. And maybe he's constantly searching for and seeking out a way to get his friend back to normal druid form. And that's why maybe he has this sort of solemn, kind of sad look on his face where even though he's larger than life and he has that big broad chest and posture, his head is kind of down. And these are all things that come from seeing a piece of artwork. I could easily pull up another druid piece and come up with an entirely new direction and backstory that I can bring to my table, all based on what I'm seeing here. So use concept art, just as I would browsing through my books. Use things online, whether you're looking at an environment, whether you're looking at a sword, whether you're looking at an NPC, of course, to start to create just cool story. Okay, let's take a look at one final picture. This is by Stu Harrington. Let me shrink that down so you can see his name a little better. His name is Stu Harrington. He was kind enough to allow me to use this for Instagram, but I assumed, in that he said I can use it for non-commercial use to kind of drive home my point of content. I'm assuming it should be okay in using this here as well. So in this particular case, look what we have over here, right? We have this really cool picture of this guy, and he looks wizardish. I'll kind of go over this one pretty quickly. There's a lot going on here. I don't know what this is, these branches behind him. I'm not sure if they are part of his costume or if they're background element. When I see the ravens, right, clearly his mask looks like that. He looks a little bit like Reaper to me from Overwatch. I see these ravens. I'm thinking black birds. I'm thinking crows. I'm thinking ravens. Almost vulturish. So I'm thinking, does this guy is he like prophesies doom? Or is he coming with something of undeath or some carrion nature, right? Or maybe the raven aspect from Game of Thrones, where I'm combining what I'm seeing visually, but I'm thinking of the visual library from what I've previously been involved with, which is Game of Thrones, in sort of how Bran is always, kind of in that trance-like state where he can see. So maybe he can send this raven out just as a fine familiar would be, and this gives him additional perception checks. So yeah, they're going to fight a wizard, but maybe when they fight this guy, he still looks wizard-like because he's got the hat and the robes and magical of nature, right? But I now am giving him additional traits based on the visuals. I'm also looking at, like I said, Reaper, who is just a whirlwind of just pure damage. So maybe this guy's like an evocation wizard, okay? And that sparks from looking at the mask. I'm looking at the mask, and I'm also thinking sort of that Plague Doctor look from Assassin's Creed, when you see the NPCs that are standing around. And when I see that mask and I think that Plague Doctor thing, maybe this guy is sort of, he, instead of the traditional wizard spells, besides evocation for damage, maybe he just has this aura of pestilence and filth about him. Maybe, he just brings with him things that sort of Dark Sun-ish, which again is going back to that reference point of building the visual library, of where there's the Defiler concept. So where this guy goes, maybe they're hunting him, but they can easily start to track him because wherever he goes, I'm thinking of this Plague Doctor look, he brings death and defilement with him. If is that a word, defilement? He destroys all the crops and he turns the land and the soil black, and these are all things that I'm thinking of. Maybe he can go into sort of vampire-wise where there's bat form or wisp form, wisp form. Maybe he can go into Raven mode or something like that and fly away, giving him better escapability. These are all things that I can simply look at an NPC of a monster in the back of the monster manual or on D&D Beyond, but now I'm kind of customizing my own monster. But when I bring him to the table, not only do the PCs have to deal with the threat of dealing with a spellcaster and a badass wizard, there's now a unpredictable element to him, and that makes him stand out from other wizards. It's not a cookie cutter thing. And I'm getting all of these things based on just some visuals of the concept art. As I said with the Druid, I can easily pull up another Gandalf looking wizard and think of your more tried and true traditional wizards, where here the Raven motif and that look of familiar, maybe he becomes Raven, maybe he's something a harbinger of doom, and he's got this plague doctor look, and it just, there's a lot of interesting things there. So I just wanted to show you and kind of highlight to you how I can use the things around me as inspiration and things that I can search for to start to fuel what I create content-wise to bring to my table to create larger than life, over the top, and awesome stories. So that's all I've got for you folks. I appreciate everyone watching. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon.